All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Community Forum on Comprehensive Zoning for Regions 1, 3, and 9. We are excited to have you here. Before we get into the content, we're just going to cover a few meeting etiquette points, specifically regarding the Q&A portion of this session. Please note the tools that you have to access. We have the Q&A button where we request that you put any questions that come up during the presentation. So please put those questions in that Q&A. And then there is the raise hand option if you want to verbally ask your questions, but we do ask that you wait to ask questions during the actual Q&A portion. And then also just a note that this meeting is being recorded so that you can catch any parts that you miss or that you would like to replay later once it is posted online. So that will be on the Arundel TV YouTube page and also on our hub sites. Let's see, we have, oh yes, one more thing about tech. If you have any tech issues, please, that is where you can use the chat feature. You can chat directly with those who are staffed on the call, and we'll be able to hopefully assist you to fix your tech issue. But again, this is being recorded, so you'll be able to catch anything you miss after the session. Today, we are here to talk about comprehensive zoning mainly, but we'd like to also provide you with an overview of the region plans and also demonstrate how to use the draft zoning map tool for regions 1, 3, and 9. And we'll have a Q&A session, and that will be your opportunity to ask those general questions about the comprehensive zoning and region planning process for these regions. And we do aim to wrap up within an hour. So thank you for your continued attention during the session. We have with us today Mark Burt, who is the Planning Administrator for Research in GIS. We have Michael Stringer, who is with Long Range Planning. He's a senior planner. We also have myself, Christine Duval. I'm also with Long Range Planning, as well as Patrick Hughes, who is helping in the wings. And before I pass things to Mr. Stringer, I'm going to open up a poll for everyone just to get an idea of your understanding of the content. So those questions are posted now. If you could click on your response, we have, how do you rate your knowledge of the different zoning districts here in Anne Arundel County? And then have you visited any of the hub sites for information on comprehensive zoning or the planning process? Go ahead and click those responses now. Once we have a majority of folks answering, I'll go ahead and post those results. We are almost there. All right, here we go. You can see those results. We have some who don't know much about the zoning districts. We have half of the participants who understand but want to know more. And then we have 33% who are familiar and have actually read the county code. That's awesome. And then we see that we have, ooh, fantastic, well done. We have everyone has been to the hub site at least once, if not often. All right, so now I'll pass things over to Michael Stringer.
Thank you very much, Christine, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight. I appreciate that you've already been doing some research and looking into this. But to start, I'll do some context setting. For those of you who don't know, the Office of Planning and Zoning in Anne Arundel County is the organization that plans for the physical growth and development of the county. So we're responsible for updating the county's general development plan, the rules governing subdivision of property, and we review the development applications when properties are subdivided and developed. Next slide, please. So the general development plan for the county, the most recent one was adopted by the County Council in 2021. It was called Plan 2040. And this is a countywide policy document for land use. It looks over a 20-year time horizon. It includes a vision, goals, policies, and strategies to implement them. and addresses land use and land use related topics like water resources, open space, transportation, housing, recreation and parks, economic development. The topics are organized into 4 major chapters that are listed here: the natural environment, built environment, healthy community, and healthy economy. Plan 2040 was developed over about 4 years with extensive community outreach, including dozens of in-person meetings and online questionnaires and public hearings with the Planning Advisory Board and the County Council. And through that public input, 3 key themes emerged: that people wanted the county to grow smarter, greener, and more equitable. So smarter, that we're more effectively directing growth to where we have infrastructure, where we can have more opportunities for people to live close to where they work and have different options for housing types and different access to different transportation options. To grow greener, to make sure that we're protecting and preserving our natural areas, improving water quality, and growing more equitable so that no matter where you live in the county and what your age and ethnicity, that you have equal access to opportunities. Now, one of the key things of implementing Plan 2040 is conducting these set of region plans. Next slide, please. For those of you who've been familiar with county planning for a long time, in the late 90s, early 2000s, the county set up a series of small area plans. And these region plans are sort of a reboot of those. We've divided the county up into 9 regions. They are not the same as the council districts or school districts. We define them through public input and through the Plan 2040 planning process. We tried to keep communities together that had similarities. We used major landmarks like major highways as dividing lines. It's always difficult to set these boundaries. You can always argue over them, but these are the best that we can come to. Of the 9 regions, we're developing the plans in sets of 3. So the first 3 for regions 2 in West County, 4, the kind of Pasadena, Severna Park, Broadneck area, and 7, the Annapolis Neck area, they've already gone to council. 2 and 7 have been adopted, and county council is currently reviewing the plan for region 4. Tonight, we're discussing regions 1, 3, and 9. 1 is the northernmost region part of the county, and that includes Brooklyn Park, Pumphrey, Linthicum, parts of Hanover, Curtis Bay. And region 3 includes Severn, Glen Burnie, the Marley Neck area. And then we go down south for region 9, that includes Edgewater, Mayo, Galesville, the Deal Shadyside Peninsula, Tracy's Landing, and down to Rosehaven and North Beach. These plans are built on extensive public engagement. The intent is that they take those broad countywide goals and policies from Plan 2040 and think about how we can implement them on the ground and what makes it meaningful in local neighborhoods. They include evaluation of community assets, needs, and development of a shared vision. An important piece of this is that there is a stakeholder advisory committee that's been appointed. They're each 15 members. They applied last summer. They were appointed by the county council and confirmed by the appointed by the county executive and confirmed by the county council. They held their kickoff meeting in October of last year, and they've been meeting on about a monthly basis through this process. A big part of the goal, the work of the stakeholder advisory committees is to work with county staff to develop recommendations, strategies for how to implement the vision and the goals for these areas. They also do analysis of the planned land use and zoning maps, and that's where we're going to focus our discussion tonight. Now, I'll talk about the timing and the process, and we'll kind of start big picture and then zoom in into more detail. Overall, this is about a 2-year process. We began planning for regions 1, 3, and 9 kind of at the end of 2022 with kind of technical analysis, researching things like demographic changes and development patterns, and also beginning to engage with the community in the spring of 2023, conducting stakeholder interviews, attending community fairs and festivals, asking people what they love about their community, what they'd like to see changed, improved in the future. Then we sat those advisory committees. They applied in the summer of 23, began to meet in the fall of 2023. And they worked, using kind of that public input as their basis, worked on developing a vision and then strategies to implement that vision. As we went through this process, as they developed recommendations for strategies on, say, things like environmental conservation or housing or transportation, we shared those out with the public, put them online on these region websites, what Christine's been calling the hub sites, to get public feedback kind of as soon as they were drafted. And we also had in-person meetings at libraries and other public spaces during that time to share that information. Over the last few months, the focus has been on the planned land use map and zoning. After this public review period of the summer, these plans, including the zoning maps, will go forward to be reviewed by the Planning Advisory Board, which is a county-wide board that's appointed by the county council. They will hold public hearings where there's another opportunity for public testimony, and then their recommendations will go forward to the county council. It should get to the county council in early 2025, and they again will have public hearings where there's opportunities for public testimony, and the county council has the final decision-making authority on the plans and the zoning maps. Okay, next slide, please. So drilling in a little bit deeper on the schedule for the comprehensive zoning piece. It really starts with the beginning of the planning process, thinking about what the public is telling us about the assets and challenges. Then we start to look at the planned land use and zoning maps and see, are there changes we can make with that tool that helps address those community needs? We've also established criteria for how we evaluate potential zoning changes. Those are listed on the zoning hub sites, region plan hub sites. Then in September of 2023, we sent out postcards to all property owners in regions 1, 3, and 9 to let them know that this planning process was underway and that there would be an opportunity to apply for zoning changes. And we accepted applications from property owners from October through December. We also sent out letters in addition to property owners where there were potential changes related to the OS zoning district. And I'll talk more about that particular change in a moment. Then after we got those owner applications in, Office of Planning and Zoning, OPZ staff reviewed and made our initial recommendations. And then we reviewed those with the stakeholder advisory committees in April through May of this year. They make their own recommendations. Sometimes they agree, sometimes they disagree. Those were in open public meetings. And now as you get to review this draft zoning map, you'll be able to see the owner applications and any other change, as well as the stakeholder advisory committee's recommendations, as well as Office of Planning and Zoning's. After this public review period in June and July, staff will analyze the comments and make potential changes to the zoning maps, and then bring it forward, as I said, to Planning Advisory Board in the fall and to the County Council early next year. Okay. Drilling a little bit deeper on the public review period that's happening right now. So we have an online tool that we'll demonstrate tonight. That's available through July 15 to accept public comments. We'll also have in-person drop-in sessions in public buildings, public spaces in each region. You can see the dates here. We'll put more information about the times and locations at the end of the presentation. And please note, these slides will be made available, so you don't need to try to take a screenshot while we're talking. This will all be online afterwards. Okay, next slide, please. So, comprehensive zoning, what is it and why are we doing it? Next slide, please. So zoning is one of our most powerful tools for managing growth and development in the county. Zoning has two parts. There's a map and there's text in the county code. And the maps are, you'll see coming up, a lot of multiple colors that show where different types of uses are allowed. And we have been using zoning as a planning tool since the early 1920s across the country. The first zoning map was adopted for Anne Arundel County in the 1950s. And so as you think about our residential neighborhoods and our commercial areas and our industrial areas, that gets codified in zoning, the kind of separation. The intent is to try to avoid nuisance impacts between different uses. The zoning code in the written part, the text in the county code, that provides kind of the rules and requirements around the zones. And the foundational things of those are what types of uses are allowed in the different zones, and then the scale of development, how big buildings can be, how much of the lot they can cover, and the distances buildings need to be set back from property lines. Now, as we look at the comprehensive zoning, we're trying to update the zoning map for a few reasons. One is purely technical. As I said, these maps date back to the 1950s. We've got a lot more sophisticated technology to be able to map these things now. So we'll talk a lot about kind of the accuracy of the zoning maps and what we're trying to do to make sure that zoning lines align with parcel lines. So ideally, just one single property has one single zone on it. Sometimes there's reason to have multiple zones on a property if it's large or if there's something complex happening, but generally we want to just have one zone per parcel. We're also looking to try to make things consistent with Plan 2040, the General Development Plan. That includes a planned land use map that sets kind of a broader policy for how we want to see development in the county. And since that was reviewed by the public and adopted by the county council, and we're required by state law for the zoning to align to be consistent with the planned land use map. We need to update the zoning to make sure it matches planned land use. Now, as we do our analysis, we also, as staff at the Office of Planning and Zoning, have some recommended changes to better match existing uses or address areas of change that we're hearing from the community. And the stakeholder advisory committees have also made some recommendations on areas that they think could potentially change and have different types of use in the future. And finally, as I mentioned, owners were able to apply for zoning change, and those are evaluated and provided recommendations in this as well. So to set expectations on this, this graph is a summary of the recommended changes across regions 1, 3, and 9. On the vertical there on the left is the acres of land. And then on the bottom of the graph are some of the zoning districts. OS is the open space zoning district. RA is rural and agricultural, think kind of our farms and rural landscapes. And then those R1, R5, and R10, those are residential zones. The number 1, 5, and 10 indicates the number of houses per acre that's generally allowed in those zones. And to the right there is a C3, that's one of our commercial zones, and W1, one of our industrial warehouse zones. As you can see, the brown bars on the left are the current acres in the current zoning, and in the blue to the right are the draft zoning. So you can see there's not significant change overall across these. The OS zoning district increases by about 800 acres, and that's because we're taking a lot of the public parks. If they're not currently zoned to OS, we're making them zoned OS, unless there's some technical reason not to. So that increases the amount of OS zoning. The R1 and R5, they don't change much. They decrease a little bit, and that could be changes from property alignments to some changes where we're thinking about shifting between the density of those housing zones. And you can see in the commercials, there's very little change as well. Christine just put a nice link in the chat, which is also on the website we'll show you shortly, to a user-friendly guide to all the different zoning districts in the county. Now, as we think about zoning, there are two other maps that help guide how we manage growth in the county. The first one is the Development Policy Area Map. And as the name indicates, this is a policy setting map that thinks about where we want to see different kinds of development in the county. So the colors on here are, if you can see a little bit on the legend there, that we have a purple color around kind of our employment centers. So areas like Fort Meade, BWI. And that's indicating that those are economic hubs for the county. We want to recognize their importance. Then we've got down in South County, the green area where we have a lot of our rural lands that we want to conserve. Over on the on the shore of the county, we have a dark blue for peninsulas to kind of take into consideration the special circumstances of those areas that have difficult transportation, typically one way in and one way out, and larger flooding concerns and environmental concerns with so much shoreline. Then the bulk of the rest of the county is what we call neighborhood preservation. These are our generally suburban areas, housing subdivisions, where we don't expect to see much change, just kind of infill development over time. So next slide, please. Then we have our planned land use and zoning maps. These two maps look similar and have some similar terminology in them. The big distinction is that the planned land use map is a policy map. So it thinks in broader categories, bigger picture, and it provides policy guidance and is adopted in the general development plan. It builds on the fundamental principles of land use planning in Anne Arundel County for the last 40 or so years. We want to protect sensitive environmental areas, protect the rural character and agricultural economy of South County, manage development and physical character of older suburban residential neighborhoods, and focus our more intensive development where there are existing jobs and infrastructure. So that's in those areas where we have those big economic centers that we mentioned, as well as places like our Odenton, Parole, and Glen Burnie town centers. Now, one of the main ways that we implement the planned land use map is through the zoning map. Now, zoning is codified in the county code. It's regulatory. It has the legal requirements. So it regulates the type and scale of development that could be permitted. It's more specific than planned land use. It's got requirements for what uses are permitted, at what density, the height of structures, the amount of the lot they can cover, setbacks, and parking requirements. So as we think about these, you can kind of visualize them in this graphic of how they relate. The development policy area on the left is the most broad. The zoning on the right is the most specific. For the different planned land uses, we have specific zoning districts that we generally consider to be consistent with them. So you can see in that top, we have our residential planned land uses, and they come in 5 different colors there, varying in the density, the number of houses per acre they allow. And similarly, the zoning responds the same way. We've got our R lettered zones that are from rural and agriculture to rural low density, to then the R's with the numbers that again generally indicate the number of units, housing units per acre they're allowed. For our commercial plan land use, we've got our 5 commercial zones from small business to then the C zones that go from 1 to 4. And as you go higher in those numbers, they have more intensive uses and allow for larger structures, more coverage of a lot. Similarly, for our industrial, the higher the number, the more intense, the larger the buildings can be. And for our maritime, we go from our community marinas in MA1 up to our commercial marinas in MC. There is a table in Plan 2040, Volume 2, Table 17, that gives that in a list form. Another way to look at this idea is to look at some specific properties. So these 3 images show the area around the Cromwell Light Rail Station in Glen Burnie. Again, from broad to specific, from development policy area to zoning on the right. The development policy area has that tan color for neighborhood preservation, and it's got this red crosshatch over it that indicates transit-oriented overlay. These are areas that are near our existing transit stations where we want to try to promote more mix of uses so that people can live and work closer to these transit stations to capitalize on that infrastructure. Planned land use is the mix of industrial and commercial and residential uses around the station. And then the zoning has that with more specificity where you can see the type of commercial, for example, C3 at the Cromwell shopping plaza there across the street from the station. There we go, next slide. So talking about making the zoning map consistent with planned land use, our initial approach is to look at the Plan 2040 planned land use map, compare it to zoning, and see where the zoning needs to change to be consistent with that map. So that's kind of the arrows on the left-hand side of the screen. Similarly, though, as we conduct this comprehensive zoning process and have been looking at these maps over the last year or so, we've come across some areas where we think the planned land use should change, or maybe an owner application came in that has a different idea that it's supported by the Stakeholder Advisory Committee and or the Office of Planning and Zoning, and we might change the planned land use to match that. So we want to always make sure that the planned land use and the zoning are consistent by state law, and it can change in either direction. Though the usual is for the planned land use to take the lead. Okay, slide, please. So I'd like to take a moment and look visually at what some of these changes are. So again, this is focusing on those consistency changes. So this first slide shows properties where a change in planned land use was adopted by the County Council in Plan 2040. Then again, staff from Planning and Zoning went back and looked at the zoning maps and recommend changes to make that consistent. So in these figures, they show an area outside of Annapolis where we have a condo development. So that planned land use, that dark red, shows our highest density residential. And the zoning shows a mix of there's 2 different zones on that property from kind of an orange to a brown. Those are 2 different residential zones of different densities. And so our recommendation is to extend that higher density one to match the existing development, that's the condominium complex, and the planned land use. Now, if you got letters like this in the mail, they went out just in the last week or so to property owners where a change like this is proposed, it will note what your current zoning is, the property address and tax ID, and importantly, it'll note the percentage of the change. Because sometimes these changes are just a small fraction of the property. Most often it's actually less than 10% of the property. We still want to make sure property owners are notified because even a small change is important. It is your land. It's your probably your biggest investment and asset. But for those small changes where we're just kind of affecting a small portion of the property, it's typically aligning with existing use and property boundaries. And the change may not be that significant to you, but it's always important to check and contact us if you have any questions. Next slide, please. Here's an example of what I mentioned with the zoning and parcel boundary alignments. This is a park in the Smyrna Park area, and you can see it's got a very distinct shape. These red lines you see are parcel boundaries, and then the filled in colors are the zoning. The green is the OS, open space zoning, and the red is one of our commercial zones. And you can see that it's just slightly offset from the parcel boundary. So while the county Office of Planning and Zoning does have some discretion underneath the current code to be able to adjust property lines, when it's off this much, we want to make sure that property owners are notified. So we wrap it into this comprehensive zoning process and make sure it gets reviewed by the public and then by the planning board and the council ultimately. Okay, next slide, please. Now going back to this OS zoning that I mentioned before. This is where we're making a pretty broad principled change to the zoning map on how we apply the OS zoning district. Now, OS, like the other zoning districts, what it does is it defines what kind of uses are allowed. And OS is focused mainly on allowing recreational uses, agriculture, and you can have a house on it if it's existing, but you're not going to build a subdivision on an OS zone property. It does not, importantly, provide public access. That often gets confused. So the OS zoning entered into county code in the 1970s, and it was roughly based on Federal Emergency Management Act 100 degrees. But there are places where it does not align with those floodplain boundaries, and we don't have great documentation on that exact location of where it's applied. So also a big change has happened in county code and state and federal regulations since the 1970s as well. We have a lot more robust environmental requirements. Those are in a different part of the county code. The zoning information is in Article 18. The development regulations, development requirements are in Article 17, and they include protections for things like forests, for wetlands, for steep slopes, as well as floodplains and streams. So now that we have those tools, we think those are the more appropriate ones to be able to protect these natural resources, because the mapping of where these natural features are doesn't align necessarily well with this OS district. So as we're going through this comprehensive zoning process, we're trying to remap it and basically apply the OS zoning on public parks and privately owned lands that are protected in perpetuity with some kind of conservation measure. And then for those properties that don't have that, we're just going to apply the zone that's on the rest of the property. So that way we have one zone per parcel. So this image on the right shows a subdivision that you can see there's a darker yellow, that's an R2 zone, so residential, 2 houses per acre on the left, and then R1 on the right, residential, 1 house per acre. And then the OS kind of winds through it. It's likely running along a stream, and as the subdivision on the left was developed, they actually did a floodplain delineation, and you can see a parcel in that right-hand image in the upper right where it's kind of angled off. And so that's actually been surveyed in, and that's been defined as a floodplain parcel that on the subdivision plat that records the subdivision property lines, it says that will stay in passive use for conservation purposes. So that meets our definition for applying the OS zone. But then the property to the right that hasn't been subdivided is just a large residential lot. Our recommendation is that we change that to just being all R1. Now, that stream is still there. Our map has changed. But if there's a stream there, if they ever want to subdivide or build a house, they'll have environmental experts go out on site and identify the location of it, have it surveyed in, and have to bring that in to drawings as they go through the development review process. And again, those requirements in the county code would then kick in. So those areas are still protected, just with a different part of the county code that we think is more the better tool for that job. Now, as numbers of changes go, those OS changes are one of the most abundant that happen out in the county through this comprehensive zoning process. That's why we sent out letters early last fall about them to notify property owners, and then notified them again just in this last week or so, as these changes have moved forward now to being our recommendations. Okay. So with that, let me pass it on to Mark Burt to share with you how you can view the maps for your community and give comments on these draft zoning changes.
Thank you, Michael. So as Michael said, I will be providing a demo of how to provide the comments, not only to our draft zoning map, but to those consistency changes that we are proposing. So if you bear with me here, I'm going to exit out of the PowerPoint and get us to the Planning and Zoning website. And this is the website, the main landing page for Planning and Zoning. I wanted to show you how to get to the zoning map from here. So on the Planning and Zoning website, you'll see this wonderful banner for us here that says review the draft zoning maps for regions 1, 3, and 9. And you'll see this red button that says visit hub sites. You hear us talk a lot about the hub sites. Let them load in here. And the hub sites are the one-stop shop for region plan information. You can see on the landing page here, we have some information on the active plans that we have going and the plans that are coming up. You can find any of the region plans here in the region drop-down list. Just hover over regions and the list will appear. We're interested tonight in regions 1, 3, and 9. So I'll click on region 9 here at the bottom. The region 9 hub page loads in, and most of you have viewed the hub pages, so I won't go too in-depth on them. But you can find great information. The latest information about the plans are at the top of the page. You can explore the purpose by clicking on the purpose tab. It'll give you some information about Plan 2040 and the Region Plan Handbook for more information about the planning process. You can explore the region with a community snapshot. It's where we have all our demographics in tabular and map form. You can stay involved and sign up for the regional newsletter. You can find information about the Stakeholder Advisory Committee and learn a little bit about the Stakeholder Advisory Committee members. You can view information about zoning and the comprehensive zoning phases, how to request an owner application, a lot of information on the zoning here, and just some additional information in the library down here at the bottom of the page. And at the very bottom of the page, you can find the county project team with the region emails. Each region has its own email. It's the region plan number at aacounty.org. So if we scroll back up to the top using the back to the top button, we'll see here that we can view the draft map is now available for public view. And we can click on this link here to open up the zoning viewer tool. The preliminary draft comprehensive zoning viewer tool for regions 1, 3, and 9 will open on the introduction tab. You can see at the top here, we have some tabs across the top that we will get into each one of those. We also link back out to the region plan websites if you would want to go back there. So under the introduction tab, we provide some information about the process in the preliminary draft zoning map, some introduction to the planning process that Michael laid out earlier in the presentation. It gives some information about the draft zoning map and the changes that you will see in the draft zoning map. And it also covers the open comment period that we are in right now. For any responses or common questions, we do have a facts page for the viewer, and it will link you back to the hub site if you would like to go back there. We also have a guide for the different zoning districts on the introduction page. The summary of zoning changes page will provide information on the public review of the comprehensive zoning map. Provide some information on the consistency changes that we heard Michael talk about, and links out to a document regarding consistency. Provide some information on the OPZ initiated zoning changes. And these are changes that staff recommend. And also some information on the property owner zoning change applications that were received from October to December in 2023. If you would like some information about the communities within regions 1, 3, and 9, we've included a community narrative map. You can click on the map and zoom into one of the communities that are colored in with inside the regions that you're interested in. So tonight we're looking at region 9 information. So we'll scroll down to region 9. We'll click on Galesville to get information on the Galesville community. And you can see that the map is a little bit cantankerous in this little iframe that we have it in. You can make the map move into its own tab by using this Open Live Content in a New Tab button. It looks like a square with an arrow coming out of the top right. So with the community narratives, we provide a little bit of information and some history on the communities and just some information about the zoning map and the owner applications. The Summary of Zoning Changes tab also provides information on the statistics for the zoning changes. And these are summary statistics, the pluses and minuses that Michael showed earlier in the chart in the presentation. For each one of the 3 regions, we have a chart that will show the change in the zoning acreages. The Comment on Zoning Changes tab is where the public can make comments on the proposed zoning changes. This represents the recommended comprehensive zoning changes to implement the vision for the region and the recommendation for property owner application request. It is an interactive map, so you can click around, identify, and zoom into the different regions. I do want to point out the comprehensive zoning number schema that we have, or how we're labeling our zoning changes. So you have CZ for comprehensive zoning, you have R, and then the region number. So for our region 9, it would be R9. We have a 3-letter acronym. In the example here, we have Glen Burnie. In region 9, we'd have Churchton, CHT. And the proposed number. And you'll see a 4-digit number that comes after the community, and we'll get into what those numbers mean here in a minute. The recommended zoning changes are shown on the right panel. You can click on them, and that'll bring up some additional information, and it will give you an opportunity to comment on those applications, and we'll show you how to do that here in a second. So just a little information, further information about the map. The blue icons represent OPZ recommended changes. The orange icons are the SAC recommended changes, and the gray icons represent property owner applications. Please note that comments on these maps will be publicly visible. The Office of Planning and Zoning reserves the right to remove obscene or offensive comments. Email addresses provided will not be displayed or given to third parties. This information may be subject to a Maryland Public Information Act request. If you do need additional assistance while viewing the map or making a comment, please contact us at 410-222-7432. All right, let's get into the map here. On the left side of the map, you will see a plus and a minus sign and a little button that looks like a house. The plus sign allows you to zoom into the map. The minus sign allows you to zoom out from the map. And the home button or the house button will take you to the original extent of the map, the original view. The Locate Me button will find your location if you allow your web browser to do that. It will also find your location if you're using this on a mobile device and have location services enabled. You can search an address or a place. Can view the active layers in the map in the legend. And you can change the base map if you would want to see if you would like to see aerial imagery or imagery with labels on it. Now, to get into the zoning changes on the right side of the map, you'll see a list here of all the zoning changes that we, OPZ, have proposed, that the Citizen Advisory Committee has proposed, and what residents of the county have requested. The numbers that you see here that start with 0001 or the up to 100 are owner applications. 100 to 200 are staff recommended, and 300 series changes are changes that come from the Citizen Advisory Committee. So you can see we have a lot in Region 1, but we're going to scroll down through the list, and you'll see that we hit Region 3 with CZR3. And we'll keep scrolling down until we get to the Region 9 data. And here we go. Here's Region 9. So we'll click on this first one, the CHT 0001. And this was an owner application. We can see that in the type of change, the zoning change application. The current zoning is R1. The requested zoning from the owner is C3. You will also find the OPZ recommended zoning and the OPZ justification. So any zoning changes that we make will provide a justification for that zoning change. We also provide the SAC recommendation and the SAC's justification. For owner applications for zoning changes, we do provide the application for viewing. If you click on the More Info link, you will be directed to a document downloading page. And once your document downloads, you'll get a PDF of the application that you can review. To make a comment on this zoning change, if you would like to, there is the yellow comment button with the little call out icon in the middle of it. You'll see if you hover over it, it says leave a reply. So we can make a comment here. Now with this, it's do you agree with the zoning? Commercial is good here. And you would enter your name and your email address, which we do not give out. If I wanted to, I could provide a supporting document, a picture, any kind of other document. And then once your comment is filled out completely, you would click the blue Submit Comment button. You will get confirmation in a green tab that says, thank you, your comment was submitted, and you'll be able to see your comment below and any other subsequent comments on this change. This is the same process for any staff recommended changes, which we will view here once the information loads in. You can see that this is a staff recommended change in the change type. The current zoning is R5. We're recommending OS, and then the justification why we're recommending OS. So that's commenting on zoning changes. Now let's check out the comment on zoning consistency changes tab. Now the zoning consistency tab has the same kind of setup, the same naming schema that we have, and the same comment note that any of these comments will be visible on the map. We will remove any obscene or offensive comments, and your email address will not be given out to third parties. Okay. So the comment on consistency changes app is slightly different than the comment on zoning app. Because there is a large number of consistency changes, we can't directly comment on those changes. or we can't add them on the left side like we had in the previous app. If you zoom into an area or enter your address to see what consistency changes may be near you, you can add a comment to the map or comment on a specific area. So as you can see here, I'm zooming into the Mayo Peninsula area, and I'm interested to get some information on CZR9 MYO 1588. So to do that, click on, as you can see, I identified a parcel there. This is a good way to demonstrate. If you want to go back, to click the back caret. We'll zoom out a little bit. And I'll click on the consistency change polygon. Now we can see the change ID here and the type of change. It's a consistency change, and we can see the current zoning is R1. We do provide the planned land use, the current planned land use, which is parks and open space, and the recommended zoning. As Michael was saying, we do provide the percentage of the zoning change of the total area of the property, and you can see parks and open space would be 97% of this property, and the justification on why. So to leave a comment on this, if you would want to comment, you would caret back out of that to the main page, and you would come down here to the bottom right of the screen to the plus comment button. Click on that, and when it loads in, you can either enter in the address that you want to comment on, or you can click on the map. So I'll click on the map here, and it can be anywhere within the change area. You can leave that point. So it'll tell you where you are if it doesn't have an address. And in the details, you have a couple questions that you have to answer. It's, do you agree or disagree with this zoning change? And I'll agree. And I don't disagree, so I'll select OS. And the reason why, it reflects the current use. If I had a secondary reason, like it's appropriate for this use and location, that's, you could add that also. You can also add in some text. But you do have a 1,000 character limit. The same with the other application. We will require you to enter your name and email address. Again, we won't give your email address out to any third party. And the same as the comment on zoning changes tab, you can browse your computer and provide any supporting documentation, photograph, any document that would support your comment. To add your comment to the map, click the Report It button. And when the map loads in, we'll give it a second here. You can see on the map, there is a point now that is green, that if I click on that, that will show my comment. Oh, this is fine here, and and I agree and whatnot. And it provides all the details. Now, if somebody wanted, if this comment was already on the map, you can leave a reply and on that comment also. The next tab is the reference map. And the reference map provides an overview of the county and provides some additional data that we do not put into the zoning changes or consistency changes comment maps. In this map, you can turn on our draft development policy areas and overlays. You can activate our planned land use. To do that, you just click on the eye, make sure the eye is activated. To turn layers off, just click on the eye again and it'll put a cross through it. You can see our critical areas. And also, we include our sewer service category areas and priority funding areas to see where the properties are located within. We also put in the adopted zoning and our recent aerial imagery. The Next Steps tab provides information on the next steps of comprehensive zoning. And if you do need translation services, we provide some information on how to do that to get the Google Chrome Translate extension for other languages or for Spanish into your Chrome browser. And we do recommend that you use Chrome. Esri Products, the company that makes these wonderful maps that we use, works best in Chrome, the Chrome browser. And with that, I will turn it back over to Michael for our Q&A session.
Thank you. And one pro tip from having helped different property owners over the last couple of days navigate this tool, respond to questions, that most people are, if they got a letter notifying them about a change, are one of those consistency changes. Now, those are visible on both those maps, the comment on zoning or comment on consistency. But you can't click on it and leave a comment on it on the comment on zoning tab. So if you got a letter and it says your property is going to change, and you find your property and it's got a little gray line around it indicating there's a change, it'll give you information about it, but then you have to go over to the comment on consistency changes tab to actually drop that comment in. And the reason for that is, we had to set the tools differently because of the different size of the data sets. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Christine, go ahead.
Yes, absolutely. So we appreciate the questions submitted during registration and also the questions provided in the chat. So, or rather, sorry, let me be technical, not the chat, but the Q&A. So if you have any questions that you have at this moment, go ahead and put those in the Q&A. And I'm going to start with a question that we received about sending notices to adjacent property owners. Were there notifications sent out to these adjacent property owners, not necessarily the owners of the zoning changes, but those next door neighbors of those?
Right. Yeah, so for those of you who are familiar with some of our other development review processes and what's called administrative zoning changes in the county, they have requirements in county code about sending notice to property owners who are next door or within 300 feet. The comprehensive zoning doesn't have those rules. So, and what we've done is we have tried to wrap the comprehensive zoning in with the region plan and our broader public engagement. So, as I mentioned, we sent mailings to every property owner in each of the regions at the beginning of the process to let them know that this would be coming and to give them the opportunity to sign up to get updates on the process. And then, of course, we as we mentioned, we sent the letters to the owners where there is actually proposed zoning change on their property. But we're having these public forums. There'll be the drop-in open houses. There'll be the other public hearings later in the process that we're hoping that through this overall engagement, the word gets out. We're also relying on our partners, like the Community Engagement Constituency Services and the County Executive's Office and others to help make sure that the word gets out, that the public is aware of these changes. And certainly for those of you who've taken the time and effort to attend tonight, we hope that you share this information out on your Facebook or other channels that you connect with people on to help spread this information.
Thank you. And in the chat, I'm going to paste some of that information so people have links they can check out, and I'll talk about those in a minute just after our Q&A. All right, so our next question is about who actually has the final say in adopting these plans.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, Office of Planning and Zoning has made its recommendations. The stakeholder advisory committees have made their recommendations, but ultimately it's the county council that has the final authority to adopt the region plans and the zoning maps, as well as amending the zoning maps. So if there are properties or changes in here that you feel very passionately about, please make sure you follow the process through to the end and take your opportunities to provide comments to county council and to let them know your perspective as well.
All right, thank you. And with that, we will close out the Q&A. I'll put another link in here to the planning FAQ page. Mark said fax page earlier, and I swear I heard fax machine page. So FAQ, frequently asked questions page, is what I just put in the chat there. Not working with fax machines. We're moving forward, far forward. Alrighty, so now for the next steps and opportunities for involvement, we definitely want your feedback in this web tool that Mark demonstrated earlier. And just for that, the closing date is July 15th. And then we have the opportunities to connect with staff, Office of Planning and Zoning staff out into the community to answer questions and help you walk through anything that we talked about today. And I'll put those times and locations and dates on the screen momentarily. You'll also actually see some council members in attendance at those. And then we'll have staff drafting the region plans for 1, 3, and 9, including those updated zoning maps. And this information, of course, will be shared with the public for another look and review. And we'll be collecting feedback at that stage too. And we'll go to the Planning Advisory Board next, and then to the County Council. And then once the County Council adopts these plans, we'll get the opportunity to implement them. And now we have one more poll to get some feedback on what you've been involved with so far. Let me go ahead and launch that poll. There we go. Okay, so our poll is asking if you have previously attended an event hosted by the Office of Planning and Zoning, and then have you previously provided comments as part of the region planning process? So go ahead and click on your response there. You know, it's late in the game, so we are it's only a yes or no, basically, making it easy. Awesome. All right, we have our responses. Let me share those out. Okay, so looks like for a majority that this is your first event that you've attended with us. So thank you. Thank you for joining. And then have you previously provided comments? I see most say no. So I hope that after tonight's event, you will be able to confidently go on the hub sites and provide your comments. All right, and
Christine,
Mike,
can I make a couple more comments before we leave?
absolutely, please. I was going to toss it
Thanks.
back to you for this one.
Yeah. Before I mention these other plans and studies that people might be interested in, we got one last question in the Q&A that I think is worth responding to with the whole group here. It's a question about tax implications from these changes, right? That's a question we commonly get from property owners. Now, we're county staff. And while county, does obviously eventually get taxes, it's the State Department of Assessment and Taxation that conducts the valuations. It sets what the value of property is going to be for assessment. So the county can't advise specifically for each property, but we've been in touch with the state about this issue, and our understanding is that they have 2 assessment categories for residential and commercial. And generally, if a property changes its zoning, say from the question mentioned, going from OS to R1, say just like we showed in the diagram, maybe a small portion of the property is OS, a corner of it, and now the whole thing goes to R1. We wouldn't expect a shift in the assessed value of the property based on that. They have a guidebook, a manual for how they assess the value of property. It includes multiple factors, and it's driven largely by what type of development's there, so that it's a single family house, the size of it, the location, the size of the lot. Those factors are going to be the major drivers of your tax assessment, and that change in zoning is not likely if it's just a small portion of the property to have a significant effect. Now, the state does go through and assess property values on a rolling basis every 3 years. Your assessment gets updated, and there's a lot of market changes happening right now. If as everyone's aware of, the price of housing has been increasing dramatically. So I personally had my property tax assessment go up a fair bit, and that's not related to any change in zoning. That's just market driving it. So the general indication again is that those other factors are going to outweigh the zoning. If the change goes to a higher density of zoning, say it goes from R1 to R2, and that it could theoretically create the potential for a subdivision and additional home site, that could be considered by the state, but they're typically conservative with that. And there clearly has to be the potential for construction to meet all the setbacks, size requirements, no encroachments or interference with the building, et cetera, for that to happen. And that additional potential home site is generally heavily discounted in that assessed value of the property. So if you are really concerned about that issue, we encourage you to contact the State Department of Assessment and Taxation directly. For the property owners where those changes was proposed, we put that contact information in the letter directly. So to follow up with them specifically, but those are just, again, general guidelines from a county person who's not the state. Switching gears to other things that we've heard comments and questions about as we talk about these region plans. There's some other significant planning efforts going on around the county. I want to make sure the folks are aware of as you're here. A big one affecting a lot of families is school redistricting. The Anne Arundel County Public School system is in the process of doing a comprehensive redistricting for the entire county. They broke the county in two phases. The northern phase addressed the school districts that are listed there. It was actually adopted by the Board of Education in November. And the intent of these redistricting is to make sure that we're aligning the resources that we have in the schools with our population demographic changes. We currently have approximately 16,000 empty seats in our schools. So we have some schools that are really overcrowded and some schools that have a lot of capacity. So they're trying to make sure that the lines more efficiently and effectively use those physical resources of the schools. The redistricting for the southern half of the county is beginning this summer, and there should be public review opportunities and draft kind of scenarios for what the changes could be out in spring of 2025. And for those of you also in South County who are in the Deal or Shadyside area, currently the county has a planning process going on looking at flood resiliency, especially with considerations of sea level rise. So there's a website there you can click on and then get to that study. And so if you live in that area or have interest in that area, we'd love to hear from you, and there'll be some public input opportunities upcoming on that.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mike. All right, and then we have just 2 more slides remaining, almost out of here. We have those drop-in sessions upcoming. Very first one was today down in Region 9. We have more coming up next week as well as in July. So definitely check out your Region Hub sites to get more details on those after this. But as Mike said, we will also be posting the slides on the web. So, all right, we have our final slide here. I put some contact information in the chat as well. So this is for contacting those region teams. If you have a specific question, if you didn't get your question answered here today, by all means, please reach out to us. And those contact emails are listed here, as well as the links for the hub sites for 1, 3, and 9, and those QR codes. If you take and scan that with your phone's photo app, you'll be directed right to those hub sites. And with that, we are finished with the content for this evening. Thank you so much for your time, your attention, and your thoughtful questions. Take care. Bye-bye.